everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Rapid Results with Andrew Weiss. We have a very special guest, Kanika, here today. Kanika Chadda Gupta is a CNN analyst. She also has a podcast around parenting. And I'm going to pull up her bio here in just a second. I actually closed out of it. But while I'm pulling that up, Kanika, tell us, what is the biggest, most badass professional accomplishment you are most proud of?
Oh, goodness. I feel like it hasn't happened yet. But definitely, working as a television journalist for CNN was on my bucket list. And basically, I was hired as a producer and within 6 months began anchoring the show that I produced. It's called E Tonight. And no one had achieved that in the history of the network. And so I think when you really have your head in the right place and you're doing the work, you can achieve these milestones in record time.
And when you say no one had achieved that before, what are you specifically referencing?
For a producer to become an anchor of a show within 6 months, like that usually doesn't happen. Usually the producer's in that role for a few years, and then you have to kind of audition to be considered to be an anchor of a show, and so I did that, but I did it in like a shorter time frame because I knew that's what I wanted as soon as I was hired.
So you did something in 6 months, but most people take several years to be able to do.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, now that I have your bio pulled up, I'll officially read it off so that people are like, oh my gosh, who is this Kanika person? So as she mentioned, she's a CNN television journalist turned podcaster, mother of 3, including twins. She aims to give credit where it's often overlooked, the lasting impact of good parenting. Through her podcast, That's Total Mom Sense, a play on words there, and spinoff series What Matters Most with Maple and co-host Michael Perry. She interviews public figures and industry leaders on not only their career success, but the life lessons they've learned along the way, non-negotiables in their busy lives, and the legacy they aspire to leave for their children, who will go on to make the change makers of tomorrow. That's Total Mom Sense podcast garnered over 1 million digital streams last year, and Kanika has been featured in Forbes, ABC, NBC, Fox, and Thrive Global. And if you want to check out our website, it's that'stotalmomsense.com. So let's talk a little bit more that you're like, here you are at the peak of your career. You went from producer to anchor. Tell us about that story. How do you even get that drive, that passion, that ambition to be able to accomplish things so quickly? Love to hear about that.
Sure. So, I always like to start from the beginning and kind of set the stage. My parents and I immigrated from India to the US when I was 2 years old. And I think, just having immigrant parents is a very unique experience because of the sense of work ethic that they instilled in me. And I remember growing up, the one thing that was just mainstay in our household was having the television on, and it would either be news or talk shows. And it was just around the clock. I grew up watching Peter Jennings, Connie Chung, Barbara Walters, Diane Sawyer, and loved, how they would put news packages together and put together really compelling news reports. And one other thing that I want to share is, every weekday at 4, my family and I had a ritual, and it was predominantly the women in my family. So my mom, my sister, my aunt, and my grandmother, when she was visiting, and I would gather together on my mom's small sofa in her bedroom to watch Oprah. And it was wonderful. I would run home from school, finish my homework as fast as I could so that I could watch Oprah with my family. And the one thing that I really loved about her was how she could use kind of the interview format for storytelling. And it didn't matter if she had a movie star or an ex-con or anyone on the other side. She'd be able to allow them to be put at ease as they were vulnerable enough to share their story. And I think that that's a very unique skill. And in any form of media, it's something that really is powerful. And I realized I had a very similar skill growing up, and I knew I wanted to go into journalism. And so when I went to Boston University, I did international relations. And then I graduated from University of Miami, where I earned my master's in broadcast journalism. I love doing these long form interviews and human interest features. And my mentor, he was the one who encouraged me to apply to CNN, and I was stationed in India. And he said, this is such a golden opportunity because you're in an international burgeoning market. You're going to have a completely different experience. And at the time, the CNN station there was just 4 years old. This was in Mumbai, in Bombay, as I call it. And I was given a lot of responsibility right off the bat. And so even though I was hired as an executive producer and was hired to oversee this show, it was Tonight, like an Entertainment Tonight, where
you got hired as an executive producer right out of college?
Yes. Yeah.
That's a big deal, right?
Yeah, that was great. That was great. And it's something that, again, I think having the master's, having my solid reel that I put together, they knew that I was, definitely qualified for the job. And then I worked a ton of late nights, and I took on the role of being a correspondent alongside my role as producer, and just put in that extra time. And was really a self-starter and proactive in the stories that I wanted to cover, in addition to what I was hired for. And that's what kind of allowed me to audition for the anchor position that was available. This was something you had to audition for only because there was a lot of different, candidates vying for the position, even from other departments, whether they were covering financial news or, the crime beat or whatever. So a lot of people kind of vying for it, and it was given to me. And so I think all of that.
You were executive producing a different show than the one you got anchoring, right?
No, it was the same. Tonight.
So couldn't you just cast yourself as executive producer? Isn't that how that works sometimes?
No. The anchor doesn't get to decide that. The news director decides that. If you've watched any morning shows, the morning show is great.
Yes.
Or any shows around how a newsroom operates. The newsroom is another one. These series actually do a really great job in accurately portraying all the moving parts. But there's a news director, and then there's a series of executive producers on the various shows, correspondents, anchors for the shows, and then behind the line positions, if you will, are the editors, the sound engineers, those who are in the control room actually airing the show, the videographers, and all the assistants that go into that. So yeah, you have to run a tight ship, and the worst nightmare for a newsroom is to go dark and go black on screen. So however you can get things being done on time and hitting those deadlines so that they get to the control room and the play out is the time that they need it, and the commercials air at the time that they need it. Everything is mapped out on a rundown to the second.
Yeah, how often does that happen? About a black screen just pops up like yeah.
I've never seen it in my career, so but it's something that you're always nervous about.
Interesting.
Everyone's just like, and we're rolling, and then the next clip, and then toss to the anchor, and then toss back to the studio, and yeah, it's a frenzy.
Wow. So so it sounds like the master's degree helped. It sounds like you had a great mentor who encouraged you to apply to CNN in the first place. Sounds like you're a go-getter, and then you also went above and beyond in your role as executive producer. Like, you didn't just do the minimum check off. You're like, no, I'm going to get involved in this, get involved in this. How about, is there anything anything you think you did to help stand out in the interview process to be selected as the anchor? Because I know, I'm sure a lot of people, they want to be anchors, they want to be those hosts, they want to follow in Oprah's footsteps. Like, tell us those skill sets of how to actually be selected for those kind of roles.
Yeah, sure. So I want to just share one interview that kind of comes to mind and really sticks out in my memory, because it was one that I pitched to do in a completely different way. And you really have to use your out of the box thinking when it comes to, especially when it's celebrity interviews, because everyone's asking the same questions and they become trite after a certain point. But this was around when Slumdog Millionaire had won the Oscars. And this was just the biggest win for the country. I feel like it allowed Indians on a global scale to celebrate in what India is all about. And Danny Boyle did a magnificent job in directing the film. And so everyone was kind of, there was a hoopla created around the BAFTA win and the Academy Award win, and Dave Patel and Frida Pinto, who were the stars in the film. And I pitched a completely different story for our network. So I said, I want to interview the young child actress, Rubina Ali, who was cast as the lead. The lead character's name was Latika, if you remember. And she was cast by Danny Boyle and his team from the slums. So they did a huge casting call where it was thousands of kids auditioning for to be in the film. And Rubina won. And so she is what Slumdog Millionaire is truly about. It was her life story.
Wow.
And so we did a day in the life, and I did this expose where she took me through the slums where she lived. And it's the slum is called Dharavi. It is the largest slum in the world. There's 1 million residents there.
Did you feel in danger going there?
No, you know what? I didn't. I feel like it was just a really sprawling community, and everybody was like welcoming. They loved seeing the videographers and the television cameras waving and wanted to be on screen. So yeah, we were received. You know, it had a really warm welcome, I would say, but. She took me through just the winding streets and shanties, and she showed me the cold floor that she slept on. And she showed me even this big cauldron that they used, that they would all pull together resources and make lentils and rice, and how they managed to, like, you know, scrape by and feed one another. And to think that this young girl at 8 years old went on to get on an airplane for the first time. That's like, number one, that's unheard of.
Yeah.
And then walk the red carpet at Kodak Theater and have an Oscar in hand. I mean, it's just beyond one's wildest dreams when you come from abject poverty. And I mean, to have that story, like, that's something that still, it warms my heart. And I feel like that's when I realized that what I like to cover as a journalist and now as a podcaster lies at the intersection of human interest stories, entertainment, because everyone's into that, and family life and family values. And so she was exactly that. And just as where they are now, she's much older, and Danny Boyle had actually set up a college trust fund for her.
Wow.
And bought her family a flat. And so she was someone who was lucky enough to, you know, make it out of the slums and have some life.
So 1 million people in the slums. Yeah, you think that crime rates would be skyrocketing through the roof every day. So it's pretty cool. You literally got to be there, literally, and experiencing it. And so can you speak to what the assumptions are about most slums and your experience and the reality of them?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a very dark underbelly to, you know, what goes on. And I can only speak for Mumbai, where I was born. But just the portrayal and how you see it play out in the film is pretty accurate. There are dons and drug lords and those who are in the mafia who kind of control a lot of what's going on in the slums. There's a lot of human trafficking, and there's so many great stories coming out that are exposing who these people are in investigative journalism. But yeah, what I saw though was a community of families and those who kind of became each other's families, who wanted to help one another, and I think that's something that's so beautiful about the country, despite the disparity, despite the fact that there is so much poverty. More than half the country of 1 billion people live under $1 a day. There's still so much joy and happiness. Reminds me of another film called City of Joy with Patrick Swayze. If you haven't seen that, it was from the 90s. But that's really what India is there's still so much warmth and happiness and togetherness, even in those circumstances where they don't have much else.
And that's interesting that you mentioned that you believe that that's why you got chosen as the go-to person for the stories, because you found the unique angle that other people weren't seeing, because everyone's like, oh, obviously the story's with Danny Boyle and obviously he's the hero here. And you were able to go, no, the little girl who came from the slums to be in this movie, she's a hero too, kind of thing.
Yes, exactly.
And so did the Danny Boyle story ever get run, or was it only yours?
No. I mean, every network was doing something different, right? And so if you looked at Reuters, that owned a company called Times Now, and BBC, like all the other networks are running their version of what was important. And I think that's something to be aware of as a consumer, that these news stations and networks, there is a level of agenda setting, because this is all run by people, and every organization has an idea of what they consider to be a top story. Breaking news is breaking news. A lot of times that's like across the board, especially if it's a crisis situation that they're reporting on. But outside of that, especially if it's in entertainment, the news organization gets to decide, is this our top story or is something else, and what is our angle and spin on it. And so we should be discerning as consumers, knowing that each channel is going to give us something different, because the owner of the channel, and then the news director, and then the producers, and then the anchors all agreed that no, this is the story we're going to come out with. And so everyone has their own take on things, and I'm glad that my network was appreciative of the angle I took.
Yeah, and I didn't realize that or think about that. So there's like a CNN America, there's a CNN India, there's a CNN Africa. Is that how it's divided up? Is CNN by each continent?
Yes, yeah. So there's CNN International, and then these satellite networks are in many different countries. And so, yeah, it's still part of corporate, but then they do have kind of the localized feel to it, and they're run by their own, owners.
So do they ever like butt heads? Like, does Europe and Asia ever butt heads about anything, or compete in any way, or anything like that?
That's something that I'm not privy to, but I feel like the decision makers on the back end, I'm sure, have to come to agreement. But they do. I feel like each of these networks operate as independent, and in that way, they within themselves as an organization decide what they want to disseminate as news.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, so you went from producer to anchor, and so tell us how you utilized your Oprah skills to be one of the top interviewers and anchors. Tell us more about the art of the interview. Love to hear more about that.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think there really is an art to the interview process, because it's not something, we're not really taught this in school, and if you've gone to J school and have some sort of journalism background, you'll learn it. But now, especially in podcasting, it seems like, everyone wants to have a podcast or has launched one, and they might not have been in media or groomed to have those interview skills. And so I'll give you a few of my tips and, tenets of wisdom. Number one is to be prepared. I think it's so important to do your research. And so when you're, interviewing a subject or speaking on a topic, make sure that you really dive in and you're reading a lot of articles from credible publications and not just Wikipedia your way through. The second is to listen. As we're interviewing, a lot of times we get inside our own head and, and you're nervous and you have an agenda and that like, in these 40 minutes, you got to ask these 15 questions. And it's like, before, it's important to have your questions kind of ready to go, of course. But before just kind of rattling off each one, know that you have someone on the other end. And the only way to really provide for a compelling listening experience for the end user, the listener of your show, you have to listen to your guest and give them that time to speak. Number three is you can have some, personal kind of signature element to how you interview. I think that's really, really fun. Walter Cronkite would always end with, Edward Murrow would always end with good night and good luck. And so whatever that is for you, for me, I have a segment called Mom Sense or Nonsense, where we kind of debunk norms or do a little myth busting around the mom and parenting space. And so just figure out what that segment is for you, because that's fun and allows you to just hone in on your X factor. The next thing is to look the part. I think that's important. I know we're, in an audio format, but if you make sure that you look professional, then you'll definitely exude that in your interview. And, you should have a team in place. Know that as you're preparing for the actual dialogue, know that you have a team behind you, whether it's like, okay, we're helping with the show notes and we're copywriting or whatever. Because if you have that and have a lot of eyes or hands on deck, it's just going to provide for a more compelling experience in the end. And then just as like tips on do's and don'ts for interviewing, I would say know that what your objective is for the interview. And do you know who the most important person is in an interview? Can you guess?
The guest.
You know what? It's actually the audience.
Ah, yes, of course.
Mm-hmm. Good question.
Yeah.
And that's what's so important to keep top of mind, because the guest is, of course, going to share their insights and want to share their story. And that's why you have them on. There's no denying that. But how can you, as really the captain of this ship who's steering the interview along, make it relevant for the audience? So that's where the preparation comes in also. But, know enough about your guests that like, okay, they've been through a such and such circumstance or situation, and I want to hear how they got out of it or how they became the success story, or in my case, in my podcast, the life lessons that they learned that they want to pass on to their kids. Because though it's a parenting show, we're not talking, potty training and toddler tantrums. It's more the broad strokes. And it's like, if you reached a level of success in your life, how are you going to equip your 5-year-old and your 10-year-old and now your 15-year-old to do that? Mm-hmm. Because that's something that all parents are going to have to, want to pass on to your kids is some level of confidence, scrappiness, chutzpah. So that's something that I'm always trying to make sure I get out of my guests so that they pass that on to the audience.
What was the last thing you said after scrappiness?
What's that?
You said confidence, scrappiness, and what else?
Scrappiness, chutzpah, which is just like your It's actually a Hebrew word, but I feel like it encapsulates your zeal, and again, it's tenacity, and why you feel so compelled to do something, and why you have the I don't know, the gusto and the fervor to do it.
It's called the chutzpah, huh?
Chutzpah, yes.
Okay.
Yes. CHUTZPAH.
Okay.
I love that word, and I think it's so relevant if you're passionate about what you do. Like, what's the chutzpah behind it for you? Another thing is avoid cliches. A lot of times, interviewers will ask, like, so tell me about yourself, or tell me about your background. And there's just no way like you're setting up that answer to be powerful enough, because the person can go on and on. So it's up to you as an interviewer to not give them such an open-ended question. You never want to ask two questions in a row. That gets confusing for the guest. And let's see. A trick would be, if you want to ask a tough question, where it could get a little sticky, you can start with, so naysayers may say that because you feel XYZ, this is how it affects them. And so it's not putting you in the opposing party's view, but you're still able to play devil's advocate and say, like, oh, well.
Oh, I like that. Is like, oh, there's been rumors of you thinking this way, versus saying, oh, people are thinking this way. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So you can kind of get it out of them that way. But I think the most important, lesson I would like to impart is that you have to make sure that you put your guest at ease. They are giving you their time and their insights and sharing their story. And that's, a really nerve-wracking thing to do for many, and so if they're giving you that, then you should be just as gracious as a host and speak to them in a conversational way as you would a dear friend or a family member. And when you bring that heart into your interviews, it's really palpable for everyone. It changes the tone completely.
No, it makes sense. So speaking of tough questions, tell us some of the toughest interviews you've had, whether like the tension was high, whether it was an angry guest, or I'm curious some of your experiences in those shoes.
Oh, wow. I don't have any that come to mind that were like, charged in any way. But there are many that have sad stories to share, and I think that's what's also really delicate in how you handle it. I remember in my television days, I interviewed a survivor of the 26/11 terror attacks that happened in Mumbai. And that was, it was still very fresh. And I think it was hard for anyone to speak out about, because what had happened was, this was back in 2011, 10 terrorists had taken the entire city by siege, and they were in the top hotels and in restaurants and cafes, and there were just these shootouts and bloodbaths, and they were holding many residents hostage. So it was a really tenuous situation until the last terrorist was captured and all the others were killed. And so the survivors who went through that had their own kind of PTSD around it. And so I was very mindful of their feelings. And then another more recent situation is,
and going back to that situation really quick. So how does that sequence work? Like, how do you even convince someone to even come on and share their experience? Like, I feel like a lot of people will be like, no, like, I'm not going to talk about, like, it'll traumatize me more if I talk about it again. So I'm curious about what that looks like to be able to make that happen.
Yeah, I think there's something so uh, it's almost compelling in the person to share because the community and society at large needs to know. And if
Mm,
it's something of terror, a horrifying experience, or if they've gone through some sort of crisis, it just allows it to hit home, especially for those who may oppose, um, how things played out, or what kind of motivations were. And something parallel to compare that to is gun violence in this country and the mass shootings that we've encountered, especially in the past few years. And most recently, the school shooting in Uvalde, Texas, at Robb Elementary. I mean, these are so many parents, as they were grieving. You wouldn't think like they would be able to even muster up the courage or have the voice. Like I can't, as a mom myself, I can't even imagine. I get choked up just thinking about it. So if someone were to, stick a camera on my face and ask me what it feels like to lose a child, like I don't know how I would have the words or just the sound of my voice come out. But the reason why so many of the parents have spoken out, many in court proceedings, is because it's driving change. We still need gun reform in this country, and bipartisan gun laws that both parties can agree on, where we find a middle ground. And that's why the parents are speaking out, because they know that if they kept it in and felt like, okay, we're not gonna allow ourselves to interact with the media, then opposing sides would never know. They would never know what it feels like.
mm. So in the Mumbai terrorist instance, yeah, it's bringing on the experience to help drive change for more security measures in the country, or talking about like why can't we have more love, or I obviously didn't see that interview, but yeah, what are those talking points? What do those look like?
Yeah, I think it's making sure that the security measures are in place, and we're aware of how easily terrorists can infiltrate into this country. And so then it's really like a plea to the lawmakers and the officials and politicians in the country as to how they're going to handle it, because now they're hearing from their civilians as to how they were tortured, or and one of the survivors I interviewed, he helped about 500 people get to safety because they were
Wow.
hiding in one portion of the Taj Hotel. And so, yeah, it's things like that, that the reason why they're speaking out is so that the politicians and heads of government can do something about it and make sure that an instance like that doesn't happen again.
Gotcha. And so going back to so the way, oh yes, I think you're about to dive into how do you handle being the interviewer in that situation to talk about that delicate topic. Yeah, feel free to dive in on that. How do you handle that?
Yeah, I think it's important to you know understand how difficult it is for the other person, and you really put yourself in their shoes, and make sure that you kind of put them to ease. And I back to my core value of just listen. If you
Mhm.
give them that space to just be open and speak, they'll share what they feel they want to. And so, as you ask your questions, you can be thoughtful about that. Like, can you recount what happened that night, and let them talk
Mhm.
about it? And what were you feeling in that moment? And what do you, by you sharing your story, what do you hope to change in society? What's driving you to share your story? And so that, I think those talking points will help them come up with their um, how they want to answer, and how vulnerable they want to get in how they answer.
I think, and that reminds me too. I think, so my fiance Salisha, she also loves Oprah and wants to be like Oprah too. And I think she mentioned like one of the things that Oprah is known for is that whenever her guest was crying, Oprah was also able to cry on demand with the guest and relate to her. Were you able to do that as well? Like you'll cry on demand with your guests and laugh with your guests, like match their emotions. I'm curious your experiences with that.
Yes, absolutely. I'm an empath, and I've always been that way. So if someone's telling me a sad story, I'm bawling, and it's just, and it's something that I don't hide on screen. And I think it's important to be able to be there for someone in that way, where, as a friend, if you were telling a story like that to a friend, of loss or something that you went through that was a difficult point in your life, you would seek that empathy and compassion. And so to have that as a journalist and an interviewer, I think is certainly like a skill that sets you out from the rest. Hopefully you're not, monotone and stoic on the other end. And I'm not even doing it because it, makes for a good interview. That's completely inauthentic. I've always been that way, regardless. If you're telling me something sad or touching, I automatically, have my emotions kind of well up, and I feel what the person is feeling.
Oh, makes sense. I think, and maybe that's, I wonder, I mean, obviously there's more emotional men than women and more emotional women than men, but I feel like it is a primarily female thing to be able to empathically relate more often, or your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. I guess, at the biological level, it, comes down to, our hormones and why we are, more nurturing. The fact that women are the ones who are child bearers. I think that's, definitely no coincidence as to why we have more of a connection with other people and children. And so, yeah, that tie to humanity and what makes us human is something that's so, kind of inherent in women.
No, it makes sense. And then I think you said there's going to be another interview you mentioned was extra tough or tricky to navigate. You're about to talk about before I cut you off about the Mumbai one.
No, there wasn't. I mean, I am doing a series on gun control, and so I know that's going to be heated. And I feel like what I like to do also is be as objective as possible. I don't play into agenda sending through my podcast or through my shows, because I want the audience to feel like this is an objective and not right or left leaning type of interview. And so there are times where you have to consider having someone who has opposing views than you on and hear what they have to say. It only makes you that much more aware. It changes your perspective. And so that's something that I am going to do is hear from lawmakers who are pushing for gun reform, and then those who are against it, and why.
Yeah, how do you go about? And I know obviously we all have innate natural human biases, but the more we're aware of them, the more we can help prevent them. But I agree that I think one of the biggest issues nowadays is that people think everything has to be black or white, has to be red or blue, has to be pro-life or pro-choice, and that they don't allow that middle ground area. So the first question is, how do you make sure to remain objective and do your best to do that?
Yes, I think, I was groomed to be this way as a journalist. And I learned a lot from, when I was in grad school, my professor, Sam Roberts. He was an executive with CBS for 30 years, and he worked as the executive producer for Walter Cronkite's shows. And so very, very respected in the industry. And so he's definitely someone I learned that from. And I feel like we have our own opinions, and we have our own views, and what side of the spectrum we fall in, like that's absolutely fine. But if you are a journalist and you're an intermediary, or your sole purpose is to disseminate the news or a story to the public, you can't infuse your opinions into that. It's ethically wrong, in my opinion. I think it goes both ways. Like maybe for those, they feel more comfortable doing so because it's how they genuinely feel, and that's great. But I think because I come from a news background, I knew that that's something that is not done with the news, and so I basically follow that tenet for my podcast. And I want to make sure that I keep the audience top of mind. They're forming their own opinion because we're hearing from both sides now. I'm the intermediary. My views don't come into it unless I share, like I can say, oh, me too, or this has happened to me as well, or whatever. So you don't have to be completely removed from the situation, but you're presenting the facts. And it's like, there's this side, there's that side. This is how it went down. Now, listener, you can put together the pieces and decide how you feel on it because you heard both sides.
Yeah, and I know that's what the news and media gets a lot of trouble for nowadays, is like, what happened to objective news? What happened to unbiased news? And I think of so I think this is a good topic, so I'm going to dive into it.
Okay, yeah, that's good.
Going back to like the Trump versus Biden debates, the first one with Chris Wallace, like everyone felt like Chris Wallace felt like he needed to be part of the debate, and the meme was like the Mexican standoff of them all pointing at each other,
Yes.
kind of thing. And so why do you think? And obviously I advocate for objective, unbiased as much as they can. Journalism sounds like you do too, but I think we both know news sources still have their own biases. Why does that still happen? Do you think that like people know they're supposed to be ethical and unbiased, objective, and yet we still see this drastic biasness that's directly happening essentially?
Yeah, I think people aren't following directions.
Yeah.
It's something so simple. We learned it in kindergarten. It's like what my kids are learning now. But yeah, I think if you're, part of the news making process, it's our job to give the public the facts as accurately as possible, and when you put your own spin on it, it's like the game of telephone. It shouldn't be like this was the phrase that was said, and by the end of it was contorted into something completely different.
Yeah.
I think it's important to be, authentic and like just kind of holding steadfast to why we're sharing a story in the first place. So, I think I don't agree with how that's happened on both sides, even though I have my opinions,
Yeah.
and I know where I fall. But I think it shouldn't be like too leftist or too rightist. It's just not ethical when it comes to being a newsmaker.
It's interesting. You say it's a matter of not following directions.
Yeah.
How much is money a part of that, though? Because I think
that's exactly. Everyone has their ideals, and again, it's like these are private organizations. They're owned by certain individuals, or boards and committees and things like that, and so they all have their own agenda, and so that's why they're trying to appeal to the masses with their agenda in mind. And yeah, I think that's it's unfortunate that it comes down to that. Money has a huge, it's why it goes either way.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I was going to ask, how do you find the maturity to be able to host an interview with someone who has an opposing view with you? And I think that's another thing Oprah was famous for, was that she was able to interview members of the KKK and say,
right.
I'm a Black woman. Like, how the heck did you come to this? But she was able to keep her cool and say, okay, thanks for sharing your side of the story. Now here's my side of the story. But I've noticed a lot of people aren't able to have that cool, where, you know, they get triggered by people, by phrases, by words very easily. And so I'm curious how you can encourage people to develop that skill, or encourage others to have that skill, and your overall thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's so important to kind of keep your composure and know that, again, you're just a conduit. You're, you know, you're sharing one side or one party's views and then another. And so once you get really good at listening, I think these kind of things don't affect you. And I think it's important to, you know, even if you are like enraged by a comment or disagree, there's a way to diplomatically do that, so that, you know, your credibility isn't at stake. You know, you don't want to make a fool out of yourself, you know. So I think there's something to be said about having that dignity when you are doing an interview.
Yeah, how do you diplomatically disagree with someone to prevent losing credibility?
Yeah, I mean, it depends. It's like on a case by case basis. I feel like I have honed in on how to be mindful, and, you know, like I said earlier as a tip, like if you wanted to say what you're feeling, and you're on the opposing view, you could just instead say, so those in the opposition may think XYZ, or naysayers may say XYZ, even though you're in that camp and they
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah.
So you're just kind of keeping it objective in that way. And yeah, I mean, it's important to know that, like, it's okay to get emotional in an interview, when it's, again, something that like others can empathize with, you know. And so if you're crying during an interview, or you know, you're getting choked up, or I think that's something that we all, as humanity, it resonates with us. But if you're getting fired up and, you know, you can't keep your composure, and you know, are like off the rails, like that's something that is jarring for the other, you know, for the audience, you know. And it's, so yeah, you have to, I don't know, as soon as it's like when a mic is in front of your face, or if the camera's in your face, like you have to be on in a different way.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm curious too, is there a debate that you would want to moderate, or would you hypothetically be open to moderating a presidential debate? I'm curious your thoughts on that.
I'm really excited to do the one on gun reform that I'm doing. I'm still working out the details for that, but, you know, I think it's important to hear from parents who've lost their kids, and they're grieving the death of their children in a mass shooting. And then it's important to hear from like NRA decision makers. You know, I want to hear from both sides. So
yeah,
that's one, I think, topic that's very pertinent to my community, because we just want to keep our kids safe. And we understand that there's certain laws in place by the Constitution, but at the end of the day, we want to be alive. So there's that, you know, and however we can best appeal to everyone, because we're all affected by this. So that's something that's very just interesting to me. But outside of that, politics isn't my beat. I like keeping it lighter. I like covering entertainment, and that's the lane I've always been in. So yeah, it's the lifestyle, entertainment, and now parenting. Like, I like to be in that arena.
Oh yeah, and so speaking of parenting too, I do want to kind of transition. Like, how did you get into your mompreneur, No Mom Sense podcast, and is that a, I forget, is that a full-time income or full-time job as well?
Yeah, it's become full-time, which is so exciting, and I absolutely love the freedom and the autonomy that comes with that. Well, I started That's Total Mom Sense out of a problem that I was facing. So I had 3 kids in a year and a half.
Wow.
Which is insane. I had twins, and then when they were just 9 months old, I got pregnant with my third. And I knew I wanted a family, a big family, but I didn't know that I was going to go from just me and my husband household of 2 to 5 in a year.
Yeah.
Like that was just like, wow. So I began listening to podcasts, and I felt like the mom space was really ridden with a lot of complaining and a lot of commiserating. It was just, mom saying like, "Oh my God, breastfeeding! Oh my God, potty training!" And there's no doubt those phases of life. I went through it with. I had 3 in diapers for a year, so I remember how hard those early years were. But I felt like if I'm dedicating 30 minutes to an hour of my time to hear 2 people have a dialogue, like, help me out here, give me some tangible takeaways, make me feel like I've learned something, make me feel like, I'm becoming a better person and a better parent for tuning in. Like, that's the whole goal. So with Mom Sense, the pillars are to be informative, insightful, inclusive, and inspiring. And the first 2, coming from my journalism background, I'm already hardwired to make sure that anything that I have on my show as a topic or an episode is going to give you the insights and be something that's relevant to the here and now. And in order to be inclusive, I have a diverse, like a range of audience that diverse guests that I bring on with a range of perspectives. And I even launched a spinoff called What Matters Most, where I have a co-host, Michael Perry. He's a tech founder. He founded the app Maple, which is essentially a product management or a household management app for parents. It's really brilliant. And so Michael is a devoted father to his 2 sons, and he's in tech, and he's an excellent speaker. And so I had him join me as a co-host because I knew that even though I have mom in my brand, I'm appealing to parents, and I want dads to pull a seat up at the table and hear from them. What are their problems? They don't have as robust as a community as moms do, and we have to hear what their opinions are, what their struggles are, and find ways to help them. Our first episode was on Michael's journey through infertility and how they had their kids, and it was just very eye-opening. And we got so many DMs from dads saying thank you for sharing the story, because I felt so isolated when I went through my own experience. So I love that we resonated in that way. And then lastly, inspiring, something that gives the audience members something to hang on to. They're like, thank you for giving me these tips, because now I'm going to use these life lessons as I go about my life and how I parent my kids. And I bring on celebrities by design because we don't hear enough about their parenting life. So I've had Kelly Rowland on the show. She's from Destiny's Child, and she's an amazing singer-songwriter and author and actor. America Ferrera, Bobby Brown, Rebecca Minkoff, Daphne Oz, Malika Chopra, all these personalities that we know as public figures, but we don't hear enough about their motherhood or fatherhood experience. And it's like, okay, tell us about that. Tell us, what rocked you, and what had you kind of have a moment where it's like, okay, I have to unlearn things that happened in my own child life that I have to do for my kids. Like, there's so many layers to it. And because these individuals have seen success in their life, I'm uniquely curious and interested in what they have to say, because surely they're going to pass that on to their kids. And it's something that we can learn to implement in our own families and our homes.
I love that. And And I like how it's all kind of like full circle, like where you said, make it about the audience, make it about the audience. And obviously by doing that, that's what allowed you to get over 1 million digital downloads, which is amazing. And just remind too, the audience, downloads are different than streams and plays, right?
Yeah, so mine was digital live streams. And so I actually am streamed on a radio station called Ruckus Avenue Radio. And Dash Radio owns that. And so that number is, totaling all of that. But yeah, so I have my live stream radio show, and that's syndicating the That's Little Mom Sense show. It airs every Thursday at 4. And then the downloads as well. So yeah, it's been great to be able to kind of leverage where my audience lives. Some of them listen to live stream radio. Some of them are podcast listeners. And so you want to diversify as you're putting your content out there, so that you can, increase your reach and grow your audience.
Yeah. And tell us again, because I know that's the top mistake people make, is that they think, oh, once I produce it, it's going to go viral. Everyone's going to listen to it. Tell us the promotion process and the work that goes into spreading awareness and marketing it. And we're curious about that.
Yeah, it's true. I think it's a multi-pronged approach. And, once you put in that research and you secure that guest, and then you actually air that episode every week, then there's like a whole slew of other things you have to do outside of that. I'm lucky that I have a team. So I have a publicist, Icon PR. They help me with my bookings and my podcast appearances, which again help increase your credibility as a podcaster. And then I have a manager, Brenda Bott, who's with Artistry Collective, and my agent, Marla Hout, who's with Innovative. So they're who they're my sounding board, and my director of marketing is Sita Milan, who's also part of this dream team that we have. So after an episode is released, then we think of ways to promote it and monetize it. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, where a lot of podcasters get tripped up. It's like, okay, well, now what? Especially if you want to turn this into your full-time gig. And so for me, I think of really innovative ways in doing so. So I'll start with the easy stuff. When you're promoting your podcast, you can do audiograms and social media, do polls, ask your, not only are you posting about your guests, because you really want to shine a light on them, and then they'll reshare to their audience. So that's a great way to grow on social, and then driving the traffic back to the podcast. Like, have your one really dynamic website that houses everything. So it has to have all your podcast episodes. Sure, they can find you on Apple and Spotify, but if it's on your website, you're driving all the traffic back, and then they're going to be able to look around at all the other things you're doing. So there's that. But in terms of monetizing, I've done, your typical pre-roll and mid-roll ads for brands, but I always like to put my producer cap on and go one step further. And so a few brands that I can highlight are Homer. They are a children's learning app for ages 2 through 8. When at the height of the pandemic, when all the parents at home were tasked with handling remote learning, we were like, okay, I have my full-time job, but now I'm a teacher. So it just totally, threw us for a loop. I brought on the CEO of Homer, Stephanie Dua, on my show. We heard from her every day throughout the pandemic. It was like a 3-month retainer that I had worked out with them. And she spoke about how parents can teach their young children phonics and teach them reading at home, how they can build their math confidence, how they can better understand their mental health and issues surrounding that, how they can do sensory play activities and teach through play. So like all those things where she is a thought leader and expert, I have now given her a platform on my podcast, because she doesn't need to go out and start her own podcast. She has a brand. She has a children's learning app that's their main thing. So now I'm leveraging my audience of parents who need her advice. And so the brand is on board because they're given this platform with a captive audience. And for me, I'm monetizing with that brand and partnering with that brand. And at the end of it, it's not so much what the retainers are or how much money you're earning. I feel the only reason why I go into these partnerships is of service, to be of service to my audience. And I know that because we were scrambling, having to handle the remote learning, I knew we'd all benefit from hearing from an expert in childhood development and in that space.
And the app is called Homer, you said?
Homer, yes.
Okay, very cool.
It's like the renowned, it's named after the renowned author of the Iliad and Odyssey.
Oh, not the Simpsons character.
But yeah, so you think outside the box like that and you monetize that way. Because if you really know who your audience is, then you can cater to their needs and know that, like, okay, they're wearing this brand, they're watching these shows on Netflix, they probably drive this car, they listen at 1 or 2x speed because they don't have time. Like, if you know them, that you can pinpoint it to like that degree, then really hone in on, okay, this is a brand that gets it. They either are aware of it and are like already buying the products, or this is a brand that I know that once they hear about it, they'll definitely be on board. And it's like, if they're like into clean eating or all things organic or whatever it may be, and you find a brand that fits all those, like checks all those boxes, introduce that to your audience because they're going to eat it up.
No, I love that. Well, Kanika, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all this knowledge. Last couple of questions are, if people were to listen to this whole interview, what's the one takeaway you want them to have from this experience?
Oh, absolutely. I would say it's something that I always ask my guests. I feel like we have a built-in sixth sense. And as it applies to parents, I call it our mom sense or our dad sense. And I think it's so important to trust your sixth sense. So, I like to ask this question is like, tell me a moment where you trusted that sense of yours in driving a decision you made that affected the rest of your life. So, and know that when you have that conviction in whatever it is you're doing, especially when it comes to media, you will succeed.
I love that. And what's the best way that people can get a hold of you if they want to learn more, if they want to connect with you, if they want to subscribe to you? How can people connect with you?
Absolutely. So I would say you could start at my website, and that URL is that'stotalmomsense.com. You can email me and my team at that'stotalmomsense@gmail.com. And you can follow me on Instagram. I have a handle for the podcast, That's Total Mom Sense, and my personal handle, where I share a lot of my guests and just some personal kind of anecdotes too. That's at Kanika Chadda Gupta.
I love it. All right, everyone. This concludes another episode of Rapid Results with Andrew Weiss. Thank you again for Kanika for coming on the show today, and we will see you all next week. Cheers, everyone.